Teamsters 1932 at teamsters1932.org/organize to speak with an organizer today. Are you underpaid and overworked? Is a living wage and employee benefits like affordable health care more of a dream than a reality for you and your family? If so, it's time to form a union. Don't be denied the wages and benefits you deserve. Come together in a union with the power of numbers. A union is not a privilege, it's your right, and it will make a difference. Contact Teamsters Local 1932, a powerful and successful labor union in San Bernardino, by visiting teamsters1932.org/organize to start today. Around the country, pointing out all of the things that are being done. You've got all of these investing in America displays going on, and all of the pointing out of what's being done. I find it interesting that Republicans haven't tried to repeal any of his things. Now remember my Republican friends in Congress, they were hell-bent on undoing Biden's legacy. They haven't done much. I mean, legislatively, the House has done virtually nothing. But didn't they promise to do a whole bunch of this stuff? What they are doing is they're willing to take credit for some of this stuff that they weren't on board with. The infrastructure bill, the stuff that's coming out of the Inflation Reduction Act, which is actually working. Again, I'm in this place where we're supposed to be at odds. We're supposed to be hating each other and tearing each other apart. And the question is it working? And are we going to continue to allow it to work? I want to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Lots to get to today, lots to talk about. Quick break, right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
The phone lines are open. Give Rick a call at 1-866-416-RICK. That's 1-866-416-7425.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So I found it interesting. The folks over at More Perfect Union had a story today that grabbed my attention. And we've had these folks on the show over the couple of times over the years. It's this group, RIP Medical Debt. What they do is they go and they buy up a bunch of medical debt, and then they, for pennies on the dollar, and they wipe out people's medical debt. And they were this time evidently this church, this Trinity Moravian Church in North Carolina, bought nearly $3.3 million in medical debt for the local residents, people who would didn't have any money, they couldn't pay the bill, so they got this debt hanging over their head, and their credit ratings are being destroyed. Well, they bought up this debt. And you go, wow, where does a small church in North Carolina get all this debt? Well, they paid about $15,000 for it, to tell you just how much destroys people's lives. Or I guess the right response is how little it is that destroys people's lives. Then this church held what they said was a debt jubilee ceremony, and they burnt up all the debt and canceled all of it. It was a great thing, and it was a celebration, and it was uplifting, and it was all these things. And I'm not taking anything away from that. Good on the good folks at Trinity Moravian Church and places across the country who do this. In this moment, it is something that is desperately needed. But this is where I get a little frustrated with our media. It's all of these stories that, oh, aren't these heartwarming, great, feel-good stories like the 100-year-old guy who's the greeter at Walmart because he can't afford his medication. He got to work. There's this where they're taking up collections to pay off people's debts. There's all of these things where you go, these are sadly signs of a system in failure. Now, this is nice. This is nice work, and I am not diminishing what these folks are doing. It's how we view it. The fact that $3.3 million in medical expenses went unpaid, that means the rest of the system absorbed that. That means that your premiums went up, the costs for aspirins went up, the costs for other medical treatments go up because $3.3 million didn't get paid because we don't have a system that ensures that everyone gets access to care. We just saddle them with a lifetime of debt. Well, this group has figured out how to go and do what the vultures do. Because understand what happens if you don't pay your debts. The hospital just writes it off. It comes off of their taxes. It comes off their net profit loss, gain, whatever. And then they sell it to a third party for literally pennies because they know they're getting nothing out of it. They know that they're not going to be able to track down this money. They're mostly poor and working class folks who just don't have it. Because we have a law in this country that says hospitals can't let you die at that moment. They've got to provide you at least enough care to ensure that in that moment you don't die before they push you back out the door, or in the case of the hospitals in Los Angeles, drop you off on Skid Row. So we then have the vultures who, after you've been somewhat taken care of, pushed out the door, run up a huge emergency room bill, then the vultures come in and start harassing you and constantly harassing and constantly harassing. And you go, don't we have a better system? Because here's the thing, you and I can't then go and buy up our medical debt like this RIP medical debt group does because they act as one of these vultures. Only they buy it and then get rid of it. They don't call and harass and intimidate and do all of those things that we've seen. And the frustrating part of this is our system. And I think we're better than this. I mean, the reality is we have the highest medical expenses of any country in the world, and we have the most expensive healthcare system in the entire world. Yet we don't get the best care. Now, if you're able to pay, if you're fortunate enough to have the resources, yeah, you're going to get reasonable care. But we've got long wait times. We've got negative outcomes. We've got all kinds of stuff where you would think with the amount of money that we're spending, we'd be a little bit better off. And again, for me, it comes back to the policy stuff. The fact that we're spending the money. $3.3 million in expenses went out. It didn't get paid. The system absorbed it. It raised the costs for everybody else. Had we a system that ensured that point of service gets paid to where we don't have all of this stuff, costs would come down. But we're never going to do that because there's too much money in it. That's too much money in it for the healthcare industry, healthcare incorporated, and too much money in it for the vultures. It's a sad thing. I want to get to a couple of emails real quick. Sandy, listening on KTRC in Santa Fe, New Mexico, pointed out, she said, Rick, I listened to your opening this evening. This was yesterday. I kept nodding my head in agreement with you. We don't hear much common sense in our media. As you said, whether it's gun rights or trans rights, we're not supposed to solve any problems. Glad to hear you here in New Mexico. Keep up the great work. And I firmly believe that. We're not supposed to come up with any solutions. Our government, the way it's set up at this moment, simply not. And I look at Tennessee. The reason something happened in Tennessee is you got one guy, Bill Lee. He signed this executive order. Will we see the General Assembly move? I don't think so. And Tennessee is turned into a radical state. And I've had people go, well, how did it happen? Well, there's a story today over at NBC News that pointed out it's the redistricting, it's the gerrymandering. It's the fact that they've been packing and cracking and doing everything they can do to make districts not even close to competitive. And when you have that kind of extremism, it's easy to go off the path. And this is where we've gotten for far too long. It's no longer competing over ideas. It's who can out crazy on the fringes. And you could argue this is both sides. I would gerrymander, and I'm in favor of gerrymandering if the goal is 50-50 districts. If the goal is to make them even districts where people then have to really go out and fight for every vote, to where your vote actually matters. Because today, they've already chosen who their voters are. So I look at places like Tennessee. How'd you get so extreme? That's how. Because none of those representatives who voted to expel those black representatives, they have no fear of repercussion. They don't care what the voters say back home. That's a big part of it. Brian sent me an email listening at WCPT AM 820 in Chicago. He says, "Holy blank." It's not the real word he used, but I can't say that. Holy blank. As a longtime listener, I've heard you take on many controversial positions and issues to tick off the right and the left. And last night you did it again, taking on trans rights, of which I am in 100% agreement. I got to tell you, I got to stop right here for a minute. I don't think that my position is controversial at all. I think mine is the middle of the road position that the vast majority of Americans believe. I think that I think I'm in the majority on most of the things. Just want to throw that out. He said, but first you said it, and then Howard Stern said the same thing. When did shock jocks become the voice of reason? I am not a shock jock, but thank you. I guess I'm in that category now. He says all you hear from the right is anger, hatred, and division. And what he's talking about is Howard Stern evidently came out and said that he's not bothered with gay people or trans people. And he said, they don't impact my life. I love when people are in love. You want to be a woman, be a woman. You want to be a dude, be a dude. Be whatever you blanking want to be with the F word. As long as you ain't hurting anybody, I'm on your team. And he said that he wished he could get Kid Rock to come on the show and tell him why. Why are you so upset about this? How is it so hurtful? I don't know why he gets so upset. And we're in the same world. I'm guessing Howard Stern now listens to the show. I don't know. But this is one of those things that I don't think it's controversial. I think most people are in the world, live your life. Life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, do your thing. Just don't force others to do it. And look, I don't see that happening. But here's the part that I get to, Brian. And this is the part that where my mind goes. I've never been a shock jock, and I've never really wanted to do this radio gig. But there were about 5 years, and this is going back about 10 years ago, when I was trying to figure out how to do radio as well as I could, how to do this as the best of my ability. So, as a truck driver, I never imagined that I would be doing this. I never planned on doing this. I've never even wanted to do it, to be honest. But I fell into it. And I wanted to learn as much as I could. So I went to, about 5 years in a row, the Talkers Magazine's conventions in New York. And I got to meet all of the right-wing talkers and all of the big-name people. I met Hannity. I met, the cold one, Ann Coulter. I met Alex Jones, all down the list. I could spend, the next 20 minutes naming all the people. And the one thing that I came away from that time period with is, and I've said this before on the show, I don't know that they actually believe what they're saying, because those conventions were all about the sale. It was all about the business of radio and how to maximize every quarter, how to maximize every word, to profitize it, and how to, there was so much of that. And it got me to this position where I don't know that they actually believe it. They just know it's profitable. So I look at a lot of the extreme positions, not as this is what people believe, but it's what's profitable. This for me is not why I'm doing this. This for me is about making a better place for my kids and my grandkids in the future of this country, not what's saleable. I want to hear your thoughts. Thanks for the emails. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Back after this. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1980. That was the day New York City transit workers in TWU Local 100 ended their 11-day walkout. The strike occurred in the context of hard times for New York City workers. The city had teetered on the edge of municipal bankruptcy just a few years earlier. Unrelenting inflation and austerity measures against municipal workers had taken its toll. Years of recession meant freezes in hiring and promotions. It also meant increasingly dangerous working conditions. The MTA cut back funding for basic maintenance, investment, and service. Derailments, accidents, and fires were common, and crime soared at stations and bus stops. Transit workers found themselves operating malfunctioning equipment and confronted by frustrated and angry riders. With wages frozen, cost of living adjustments or COLA capped, and the establishment of a 3-tiered pension plan, workers had had enough. They walked out on the first day of the month, demanding a 30% wage increase, quarterly COLA, and increased vacation time. New York City Mayor Ed Koch opposed the workers' demands, fearing any victory for the union would ruin upcoming contract negotiations with the city's 300,000 municipal workers. He also used the strike as an occasion to whip up anti-union sentiment. While the contract was voted up by a 3-1 margin, labor historian Joshua Freeman notes that the 1980 strike ended up in victory that many transit workers saw as a defeat. Workers won a 17% wage increase over 2 years, a 3% cost of living adjustment, and increased contributions to the health and welfare fund. But they also had to concede to reduced breaks, 2-tiered wages, and increased job duties across classifications. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
My city's daily newspaper has gotten so emaciated it should be in hospice care. Its front section is down to 6 pages, half of which are cheap ads, and nearly all of its articles are out-of-date cut-and-paste pieces bought from out-of-state content providers. This embarrassment, put out by the Gannett chain of over 1,100 cadaverous papers, pretends to be the news source for Austin, a vibrant city of 1 million people and the capital of the second-largest state in America. Gannett, owned by a multi-billion-dollar Japanese hedge fund, profits by buying up local papers, firing most of the news staff, raising prices, selling off the paper's assets, then killing the paper. If your town's publication is now a Gannett property, look to Salinas, California for its future. The 152-year-old Salinas Californian was this important region's main news artery until its new hedge fund owners started hacking. The paper was down to 1 reporter last December, but that lone journalist quit. And the Californian is now a newspaper without reporters, meaning no coverage of elections, city hall, sports, police, workplace issues, etc. The Salinas paper is technically alive, overseen until recently by another Gannett paper located 300 miles away. Now, says the chain's comically named Center for Community Journalism, Salinas residents can get their news by reading Gannett's national paper, USA Today. This is Jim Hightower saying, actually, Gannett's bosses are making major investments in themselves. CEO Mike Reed's salary this year is $8 million, and the global chain's owners will spend $100 million for a stock buyback scheme that will artificially jack up their own wealth. This is a blockbuster story of real news affecting real people and democracy itself. So how many Gannett newspapers do you guess are covering it?
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So I talk about a lot about communities coming together and fighting for better opportunities, for better stuff, the commons. And tomorrow marks the 89th anniversary of of workers in Toledo, Ohio doing that. It's the 89th anniversary of the auto light strike, the electric auto light strike. And a couple of years ago, we were there. There's a monument there, and had a couple of historians come in and share the stories about what happened and how the community came together. And it's one of those really important strikes that I thought we should mark the occasion by having, probably in my view, one of the top labor historians in the country come on and share his thoughts. That's why I've asked my friend Eric Loomis to come share some thoughts. He's a professor, historian, lawyer, guns and money blogger, but more importantly, the author of the most important book, A History of America in 10 Strikes. Eric, thanks for taking time for us.
Well, thank you for having me.
So, I look at the anniversary, the 89th anniversary of this, and for me, the message that came out of it was a community that pulled together that you don't see today.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, the really short version of the story, and we can go into more detail if you want to, is that you had a bunch of workers who were trying to form unions, who were working for this plant called the Electro Auto Light Company that basically made starters and other such things for the auto industry. They have some very initial unions. It's pretty tough. But the companies tried to crack down on that. They want to stop any unions from coming in at all. And what ends up happening, in short, is that the local community really comes out in full force. When they go on strike, there's some sort of radicals that come in to help them out, some ministers and some other pretty radical people, and they go on strike against the companies. The company throws the leadership into prison, and then they try to break the strike. They're going to bring in strike breakers, and when they do that, the community of Toledo, the masses of unemployed, this is 1934, it's very high unemployment, they come together and they basically stop the National Guard from opening the plant, where the governor of Ohio had sent in the National Guard. There's pretty much a 5-day standoff. A couple of people actually die. The National Guard kills a couple of workers, and eventually the workers have a pretty big victory there. And it's one of the critical moments in that radical year of 1934 that lays the groundwork for the kind of big-time social legislation that you see in the later 1930s, the National Labor Relations Act, the Social Security Act, the Fair Labor Standards Act, and other critical laws that basically create the outlines of dignified work for Americans.
No, and in talking about it, I was reminded that, again, the community did come together, but this is one of those times where the company threw everything they could and did all of the things that were very common. But out of it, as you pointed out, came this legislation, because this stuff was going on across the country. These kind of moments were happening where there was unrest. And the unemployed who had, as I remember it, and you're the historian here, were always used to break these strikes. We're always standing outside of the window, waiting to replace the people inside. And this is one of the few times where that didn't happen.
Yeah, one of the interesting things about the early 30s is that when you see unemployment rise so high, at the peak of the Depression in the winter of 33, so a little more than a year before this, 25% of Americans were unemployed, and about 25% more were underemployed, were barely getting any work at all. And so there's this massive unemployment, and certainly there are cases you can find where unemployed people were brought into strikebreakers, but there is an unusual amount of solidarity actions that are taking place at that time. Unemployed workers marches, for example, demands for jobs, a kind of growing understanding coming out of the organizing culture of that time that working as a scab was not really going to pay off for you in any kind of meaningful way in terms of a long-term job or even a much of a short-term check for your family. And so you have these moments in which the unemployed sort of serve as a kind of general group, kind of a solidarity group with the workers, because what they're seeing is that all members of the working class are basically, they have the same interest at this point in time. And for once, they're really acting on it. And when they do act on that, it really leaves the companies with few cards to play. Yeah. Even when the state of Ohio brings in the National Guard, that level of resistance, really made a lot of people in Ohio think, how far do we really want to take this? And the Ohio National Guard the Ohio political establishment really backs off of it.
Back in 2013, we did a labor history tour, went across the country and found stories like this. And we were in Kansas City at one of the auto plants. And the guy, took us upstairs and said, out of this window and in that field, there would be, 5,000 people waiting for someone to get fired to replace them. And everyone knew that if they were to go on strike, those 5,000 people would probably walk in the door. And that's why I think this is so important, because, at the time that was kind of prevalent in a number of places we went. So, in looking at, granted, this is 89 years ago, and I have people all the time say, well, we needed unions back then. What's the message in this for today? What do we take from what happened 89 years ago today?
Well, I think that what we take from it is that when communities actually come together and engage in solidarity actions for workers that are on strike, that they can actually make a significant difference. The idea that we are all these sort of passive observers that can't do anything to really change the country, I think is something that really benefits the corporate elite, because we can. Because you see that over and over again, right? It doesn't even necessarily take that many people to really put a halt to various forms of exploitation, or at least to, make the forces of order respond in a different kind of a way. And you've seen this recently with things like the teacher strikes that we've seen all over the country and have continued to see in such as in Los Angeles last week or the other week, in that these workers are going on strike for reasons that really touch the heart of the community. And even though it inconveniences parents, the parents are effectively engaging in solidarity actions by coming up and working out childcare and effectively supporting the strike, because they know it's going to make the school a better place, because they know it's going to be better for their children. And so, even a relatively passive action like that actually can really matter, because I think that in those kind of cases, what these school districts have been counting on is for angry parents to denounce the teachers or denounce the school workers and place pressure on those teachers and school workers to go back on the job in subpar conditions. That hasn't happened. The teachers unions and school worker unions have won quite significant gains. So I think that's just one example of the way that can work today.
No, I think it's the message is important, because across industries, we should understand that the person who's walking on that picket line, we've got more in common with than the person standing up in that office window or in those corporate boardrooms.
Yeah, and I think that so often in the United States this is forgotten about, or it is there's a sort of an active propaganda campaign against this, or against the idea of solidarity, right? This idea that we have something in common with the millionaire class, or even the employer class, right? Maybe they're not millionaires, but they're our employer, or they're our foreman's employer, or something like this. These people have nothing in common with us at all, right? They exist to take basically take the profits and the work that we generate and turn them into private gain for themselves, while providing us as little as possible. And this really exists throughout the economy. Yes, of course it exists in what's left of the auto industry in the US, and it exists at Amazon, and exists at McDonald's, but it also exists really in white collar jobs too. And we have very low outside of things like college professors, we have very little unionization in white collar jobs, but effectively the same thing's happening. And there's this sort of belief that we're all on the same page, but obviously we're not on the same page, because when the rubber meets the road, that employer is going to throw you under the bus and take the profits. And we see this over and over and over again in American labor history, as well as contemporary labor.
No, absolutely. And thinking about where we're heading, because I've been paying a lot of attention to the conversation around AI, which nobody's really paying attention to. We're at a major moment in transition, a technological change. I mean, it's going to make the Industrial Revolution, look like a blink on the page. This is going to be horrible, and workers don't have the power to defend their jobs or get any kind of help in transitions or any of that stuff in this moment, I don't think.
Yeah, I mean, we're not, when we're thinking about something like AI and, large scale automation, self-driving vehicles and these sorts of things, I've also long suggested and have been worried about this, and suggested that we need a more forward-thinking plan around this, because if this actually happens, we have to understand the development of new technology exists at the workplace in order to take more profits away from workers and place them in corporate hands. We already have the largest income inequality we've seen in this country since the 1920s. that's only going to get worse. And I think, though, that right now what we don't have is a kind of politicized movement to say, provide a government guaranteed job for all workers, regardless of, this issue of automation. So go ahead and automate, but, we're going to find different ways to provide you with work, which, can incorporate certain things, say, that came out of the COVID experiments, with direct funding of people, but also can sort of rethink what work really is so that people can still be providing people could be providing useful things to society, in ways in which they could live a dignified life and get wages for it, even if maybe some of this other work is, now being automated. But these are not conversations that very many people are having, and there's certainly the possibility there of a very rapid, and very disturbing change that could be coming down the road much sooner than we think. If we don't have those conversations now, we're not really going to be prepared to deal with it.
No, I'm right there with you. You're listening to the Rick Smith Show with Eric Loomis. He's a professor, historian, blogger over at Lawyers, Guns, and Money blog, also the author of A History of America in 10 Strikes. We'll get links out on social media how you can pick that up. An incredible read and a very important one. But back to this, this AI thing, because, going back to the lessons learned from the past, are we capable of ramping up much like my grandparents' generation did? I remember hearing stories about, when they came back from the war and even in this time period of communities, doing this stuff. We've been trained for so long to be hooray for me and the hell with everybody else. Is this something that's possible without the kind of mass pain and suffering that you saw in the 30s?
Well, I think there's reasons to be optimistic, and there's also reasons to be concerned. I mean, on the latter, you're absolutely correct. We live in an extremely individualistic culture. That individualism is even very strong on the left, in which people, will create a series of personal political positions that they hold dear, which is fine. But then if, a given politician or candidate or person that they're working with, he doesn't hold all of those positions or has different positions on something, then there's not an attempt to so often an attempt to reach out to common ground, but rather an attempt to separate yourself from those people. And I think that, too often today, functionally, what solidarity means, when I or you or somebody uses the term solidarity today, what they really mean is, I want you to do what I want you to do to support me, without any kind of the obligation side of that, which was central to the beginnings of the word solidarity and its usage in the 19th century. That it was about mutual respect and mutual action. And a lot of times we've lost that today. But on the plus side, I do think that especially younger people are very angry and very much about demanding significant change that generations, including very much a Gen Xer, absolutely did not do. We are seeing the kinds of political upheaval caused by generations of this extreme individualism right now, as older generations, certainly the baby boomer generation, was very much reared on individualistic ideas, ironically, since they were built on the kind of collective framework that came out of the New Deal and the sort of solidarity that we were talking about at the auto light strike. And so you have this very atomized, angry politics now. And I think that with younger people, even if haven't really quite been trained on how to necessarily work out ideas of solidarity, there is an inherent belief that a lot of things have to change, and they have to change together. We're talking about climate change, we're talking about gun violence, we're talking about trans issues, and we're talking about things like student debt and economic inequality as these young people go into a workplace that is tremendously unequal.
Yeah, so some could argue we're already in that position of economic upheaval and pain and suffering for somewhere. It's almost a necessity, isn't it?
Well, I think it absolutely is. I mean, I think that there's a lot of issues today in which, when I talk to my students, there's a sense of common sense politics here, right? That the environment should be protected, that we shouldn't be shooting each other, that, student debt shouldn't be a huge issue for them, that everybody should have access to a decent job. All of these things are sort of seen by a lot of, especially younger people, I think, as being something that should be above politics. And yet it's not. It's all bogged down by this, right-wing extremism and corporate domination of America that we've seen. And I think that, we are absolutely in a desperate situation on a lot of these issues, especially climate. And I think that this kind of coming together and this new sort of generation of people working together and of trying to come together, which I think you can really trace back to Occupy and move it through the Bernie Sanders campaign and through a whole bunch of other stuff, the Wisconsin protests back in 2010 to the teacher strikes now, that there's a kind of collective of sort of people figuring out how to do this again. And so I think that I feel good about what a lot of younger people are doing, but there is still that sort of structure at the top that's stopping that widely popular and necessary change for being able to take hold.
Yeah. So last question I've got for you. What's the hope of the message coming out of the anniversary, the 89th anniversary of this electric auto light strike? What do you want people to take away from this? What's the takeaway here?
The takeaway is solidarity. The takeaway is a real form of solidarity. A solidarity where you go out and you personally do something to help other people, not in a charitable way, but it's standing up for their rights, for their dignity, because you're all standing up for your rights and your dignity. And so I think that, we can think of tomorrow, April 13th, or April 12th, I should say, and, going into May with May Day and all of this and all of the labor actions that have happened in May is a time to rethink what solidarity really means and to ask yourself, what is your obligation to your fellow workers, not their obligation to you? What is your obligation to them? Because in Toledo, we saw that pay off with a major victory, and we saw that pay off repeatedly through the New Deal era and that classic mid-20th century period of union victory.
There you go, Eric. I appreciate the time and the insight. Outstanding stuff. Thanks so much, Eric Loomis, professor of history and the blogger over at Lawyers, Guns, and Money blog. Make sure you check that out. Also, the author of A History of America in 10 Strikes. Going to take a quick break right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Lines are open. Give Rick a call at 1-866-416-RICK. That's 1-866-416-7425.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1934. That was the day that labor organizer Frank Norman disappeared from the Lakeland, Florida area and was never heard from again. It's believed he was kidnapped and murdered by members of the Ku Klux Klan. Norman was organizing citrus workers in the northern part of the state. The citrus groves, cigar factories, and textile mills in the area maintained a highly segregated workforce. The Klan terrorized workers and labor organizers that dared to disrupt this segregation by attempting to organize workers across racial lines. Klan members marched in parades through workers' neighborhoods and burnt crosses near union meetings. The next year, another union organizer, Joseph Shoemaker, was kidnapped by the Klan. Shoemaker had come to Florida from Vermont to organize cigar workers. 44 Klan members took Shoemaker and 2 other men 14 miles into the woods outside of Tampa. Shoemaker's leg was plunged into boiling hot tar. He was beaten and tortured and left for dead. When he was found, doctors tried to save his life by amputating his leg. But after 9 agonizing days, he died from his injuries. The investigation into the crime showed collaboration between the Klan and the local police. 5 policemen were convicted and sentenced to just 4 years in jail for their role in the terror attack. But the next year, their sentences were overturned and they were released. No one was ever held accountable for the murders of Norman or Shoemaker. These 2 men and countless others forgotten by history gave their lives trying to organize workers and stand up for racial justice. The Klan terrorized union organizers across the South, in states like Tennessee, Georgia, and South Carolina. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
So, remember how Donald Trump said he loves the poorly educated? I gotta think that's a GOP, I gotta think that's one of their their hard lines, because I look at what's going on in Missouri right now. The Missouri House of Representatives, Republicans voted to defund the state's libraries. They so loved the poorly educated that they want to make more of them. And that's the only thing I can come up with in this. Why would you vote to take, out of a $45.6 billion state budget, a couple $1 million? Why would you choose that? Other than this is about punishing libraries for being open and welcoming and to everybody, not to just your ideological insanity. Yeah. Let's go to the phones. Got Alice on one. Alice, how are you?
Totally insane.
Par for the course. What's up?
Well, I'm reading the newspaper, I'm listening to the news and all this, and I have just come to the conclusion that somehow or the other, I don't even know at this point, it's like somebody's doing it. I guess it's the wealthy, because I don't believe in this, the conspiracy theory, it's a secret society. We know who it is. It's the Republicans.
It's not secret.
But, yeah, it's not a secret. It's just like they are trying to make everybody so miserable so they can push their own little twisted beliefs on everyone. It's just mind-numbing that people are sitting back and allowing this to happen.
Well, I mean, I empathize with some folks who they're on the treadmill. They're on the hamster wheel like the hamster, just trying to keep up, just trying to keep a roof over the kid's head, food on the table, just trying to make sure the car doesn't break down so they don't lose their job. People are just they're trying, man, and they're struggling. And we've got a political system that's so broken because we are so divided that it's never going to help those folks. But sadly, those folks can't get off the treadmill long enough to go, hey, we can make real change.
I know it between that and then the ones who seem to buy into this conspiracy stupidity, living in an alternate universe. I'm just going, really? At this point, I'm going, I don't know. Maybe the meteorite should hit and just blast it all off the earth.
No, I would prefer not that.
Well, me neither, but I mean, it's just mind-numbing at times, and it's crazy. But you have a good evening.
Appreciate it, Alice. Thanks so much. No, I mean, look, we've talked about this a number of times. The reality is there's no secret society. The wealthy, they're not secret about it. They are very happy to let you know that they've got all the money and you don't. And they exercise that power in a variety of ways. I look at this Clarence Thomas thing. I'm watching the Republicans now line up behind Clarence Thomas. Clarence Thomas is an American hero. Clarence Thomas is our guy. No, Clarence Thomas is bought and paid for. And there should be no surprise. All of these guys have these personal friends, have always had it, which is why it's rare that legislation, laws, whatever, Supreme Court decisions, why this stuff rarely goes the way for working people. How do you defend a Supreme Court justice taking a $500,000 free vacation, a 9-day Indonesian free vacation on a yacht, $500,000? If you or I were to go on this trip, it'd cost us $500,000. But hey, he's got a friend. And this is one of those things. And it's one of those angering moments where you go, I think I have the wrong friends. I think I need richer friends. But look, there's a quid pro quo there. It's not like, hey, Clarence, I took you on that vacation. Get me this. It's simply, hey, Clarence, I've got some friends who are thinking about some stuff. Perfect example. I had a friend who was in Congress a number of years ago. His name was Phil Hare. He was a congressman from Illinois. And I asked him, I go, so who's buying votes? And he goes, nobody's ever bought my vote. Nobody's ever bought votes. What they do is they buy my ear 15 minutes at a time. Every time I have to make a phone call and ask for a campaign donation, I get to hear their problem. So before they write me the check, they tell me what's wrong. And now imagine listening to 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 of those people who are donating to your campaign who all have the same problem. You're naturally going to go, well, hey, my campaign, people are going to need this. I'm going to help out my campaign people. I'm going to help out my friends. They want to keep me in office. And, I look at the Supreme Court justices that we've got. They were put in there on purpose because ideologically, they're on the exact same line. They've been extremely well vetted by the Federalist Society. So are we surprised that they're all basically on the same take? No, shouldn't be a shock at all. And it's not secret. Not even a little bit. Want to hear your thoughts? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com.
Looking at Louisiana now, it can serve as a model for what we can expect to happen in the future.
Scientists find a dramatic, abnormal rise in sea levels in the southeast.
Our proposed rule would dramatically reduce the number of people with elevated cancer risk from breathing air toxics.
Biden EPA limits air pollution from chemical and plastics plants. Plus,
there's a bell to left. That's gone. It's out of Tiger Stadium.
Global warming is boosting home runs in Major League Baseball.
All of those stories and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
Leave my gas stove, my air conditioner, my light bulbs, red meat, SUV, and especially my toilet paper alone.
Hey, Sean Hannity, after lying to your audience for all of these years, don't you find it strange that not a single one of those things has been taken from you? Food for thought. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, never mind that liar, Sean Hannity. What truths do you have to share with us today?
Well, first up, March 2023 was the second warmest March ever recorded since record-keeping began in the 1850s. That's according to Europe's climate change service, Copernicus. The fact that March 2023 clocked in as the second hottest March is very concerning as it arrives at the tail end of a La Niña weather pattern that tends to cool global temperatures. Sea ice extent in both the Arctic and Antarctic are also at near record lows.
So we had a La Niña. It should have been cooler this year. We ended up with the second warmest March ever.
Sadly, yes.
Okay.
Ominously, the temperature of the world's oceans also hit a new all-time record high last week since satellite records began in 1980, according to new data from NOAA. Scientists say the new record is causing rare, simultaneous marine heat waves around the planet. And the new data strongly suggests we'll see a warming El Niño pattern coming later this year, which tends to spike global temperatures and intensify extreme weather disasters like heat waves, storms, and floods. It's a great time to get ready now before extreme weather hits your area. You can get started at the website ready.gov. In related news, multiple new studies have documented an abnormal and dramatic rise in sea levels along the U.S. Gulf and southeastern coasts over just the last decade. One federal tide gauge at a site near New Orleans recorded sea level now 8 inches higher than in 2006. Sea level rise is not uniform, but all of the studies found a similar accelerating trend since 2010 across the U.S. Gulf and Southeast, rising on average about an inch every 2 years, a rate that one scientist called, quote, unprecedented in at least 120 years. The new data raises new concerns that coastal economic and industrial hubs like New Orleans, Miami, and Houston are at more risk from rising seas and earlier than previously predicted, alongside some of the nation's most exposed and poorest regions. Some good news, the Environmental Protection Agency has proposed new air pollution standards for carcinogenic chemicals from chemical and plastics plants nationwide, aimed at reducing harmful toxic emissions across the country. The first update to the rules in 20 years will curb releases of more than 80 hazardous chemicals that drift beyond a facility's property lines into nearby residential areas and will primarily affect industrial facilities along the Gulf Coast, in Ohio, and West Virginia. Standing in front of smokestacks of Louisiana's Cancer Alley, EPA Administrator Michael Regan said the new rules will significantly reduce the risks of asthma, cancer, and other ailments for people living near those industrial sites.
The number of people with elevated risk would drop by an astounding 96%. Everyone in this country deserves clean air to breathe, clean water to drink, and the opportunity to live a healthy life.
Some more good news. Retail giant Walmart is dramatically expanding its electric vehicle fast charging network. Axios reports Walmart plans to install fast chargers at thousands of its stores across the country by 2030, a major expansion beyond its current 280 locations. The company says 90% of Americans live within 10 miles of a Walmart, so the move will put fast EV charges within reach of far more drivers.
Yeah, but you have to go to Walmart.
Finally, researchers at Dartmouth College in New Hampshire crunched data from 100,000 Major League Baseball games, finding that higher temperatures caused a surge in the number of homers hit out of the park. Why? Because hotter air is thinner, causing less drag on the ball. The study estimates that since 2010, global warming has delivered nearly 60 more home runs per baseball season than might otherwise occur. So, yes, more home runs are more likely as global temperature rises.
Because of the drag on the balls.
Yes!
For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com.
Are you tired of think tank approved corporate news and commentary? Are you tired of CEOs telling you what to think, who to hate, and who to vote for? Well, welcome to the Rick Smith Show. We don't take orders from some boardroom, and we don't do focus groups or talking points. We don't work for them, and we never will. I'm Rick Smith, and I work for you. Join us daily at thericksmithshow.com and download the podcast and never miss a minute.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So some good news coming out of Maryland. Their Governor Wes Moore, he has signed into law an increase in the minimum wage. Pennsylvania is still waiting for you. It's been, what's it been, 17 years since we've raised the minimum wage here in Pennsylvania on the state level. Well, Maryland has raised it to, starting next January 1st, $15 an hour. That is a good thing. They say it's going to help about 126,000 Maryland households. We will see. I think it's a step in the right direction. It's about damn time. And here to share some thoughts on how important this is and why business should be behind it, I've asked Aaron Sayedi on to come talk with us. Aaron is the owner of Well Paid Maids, their website, wellpaidmaids.com. Aaron, thanks for taking time for us.
Yeah, of course. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
So were you at the event today where the governor signed this into law?
Yes, I was. I didn't get my pen, but I was there. They're
pen?
Giving out free pen. Yeah, they're giving out free pens.
I got my pen from when Rendell signed it back in 2006. And I'm going, I hope there's going to be another one next year. And it's that was what I said to him, and it didn't. There hasn't been one for a lot of years. So tell me about the event.
Well, it was a very kind of triumphant event. Governor Moore was there to tout not only this, but an increase in the child tax credit for Maryland workers as well, as part of a push against child poverty. It's a big issue in Maryland, like it is everywhere really. And one concern in Maryland is also that in recent years we passed a large education bill, the Kerwin Act, that funnels a lot more money into education. But recent statistics that have been released on child poverty in the state of Maryland and how that would interface with that education law indicates that it's going to cost a lot more than they thought it would. And so it's kind of related to that, but of course it's its own issue on its own legs.
So now this is a pretty big jump up to $15 an hour, because I remember the first iteration of this, it was an incremental thing, if I remember right. But this is a jump, from this January 1st, it's $15 an hour. That's a pretty sizable jump from where it is right now, isn't it?
Yeah. So somewhere around $13 right now. And so it'll be a significant jump to happen in less than a year. Absolutely. But that's one thing too that I'm kind of as I've been advocating for this minimum wage increase and others, is that what sounds scary, what sounds as like, wow, that's a jump, and it is. It's great for workers. The thing that we constantly hear from the business community is, the sky is going to fall. It's going to kill us. It's going to put us out of business. But when I think of running my own business, the idea that there's going to be some marginal increase to the wages we pay, whether it's $1 or $2 or something like that, it's really not something that's top of mind for me. And I really challenge the idea of other business owners awake at night.
Now, also one of the arguments I make, and I got to ask, as a business owner, when are you moving to Pennsylvania? Because we're told now that the minimum wage is going to be $15 an hour, more than double what it is here in the state of Pennsylvania, still at $7.25 because of the federal increase. Pennsylvania state law is still $7.15. You should be moving to Pennsylvania. We got cheap exploitable labor here.
Well, I agree with you. I mean, it's an opportunity to, I think, do a lot of good. And because, there's an unfortunate dynamic, which is folks in state capitals care about what people who own businesses say more than they care about what workers say or what, union representatives say. And so, like it or not, having business voices to say, this bill is actually not just not a problem, but it's something that's good for business and ultimately good for all of us is something that's really useful. So I agree with you. We should be in Pennsylvania, and I think it would be an asset to the fight to raise the minimum wage there.
Yeah, but I got to think that your business wouldn't operate well out of Pennsylvania. I got to assume your clients are going to be in Maryland, right?
Yeah, I mean, we have a branch in New York City, and so it's just about a year old, and so we'll see how that goes. But in theory, there's nothing to.
KCAA Loma Linda. The Legacy KCAA